start by talking about what the Army was doing here in the winter. And because we have the mural, then we're going to head over to Wick House and talk about how the Army impacted people like Mr. Wick. So typically 18th century armies don't fight in the winter because they have to walk everywhere and there's no snow plows. So you get a lot of snow, it's hard to move. Eventually the snow melts, but their roads are made of dirt, so everything turns to mud, so once again it's hard to move around. So when the weather got bad, typically the armies would look for a safe place to camp, wait for better weather. You've probably heard of Valley Forge.
Yeah.
That was a winter encampment. But they only camped at Valley Forge for one winter. Parts of Washington's army actually camped here for 4 different winters. The one we focused on is the winter of 1779, 1780. That was the biggest encampment. There were 10,000 soldiers here. They built over 1,000 log cabins. They chopped down over 2,000 acres of trees. The mural actually doesn't even show the whole camp. One cluster of huts, like you see down here, is called a brigade. And there's actually 2 brigades off the map over there, the Connecticut line. Those guys over there on that road are marching at the Starks Brigade, which was New England guys. Up over the hills where you can't see them was the Artillery Brigade. And our own New Jersey troops were south of us, down under the floor. Then, just to do the mural itself, Hand's Brigade here was commanded by General Hand. He was from Pennsylvania. He has 2 regiments from Pennsylvania. He's got 2 regiments from Canada. When we invade Canada in 1775, some Canadians think it's a great idea and they join the army. Then we get driven out of Canada and they have to leave along with their families. They actually become refugees. Their families live in refugee camps in New York State well after the war.
Wow.
So, Hand's Brigade there. These 2 brigades were from Maryland. And there was 1 regiment from Delaware mixed in there. Delaware was such a small state they couldn't raise a whole brigade. Up there at the top, that was the New York Brigade. And the 2 off to the left, that was the Pennsylvania line. If you drive through the park today, there are some replica huts built up on top of that. And the land they come to belonged to Henry Wick. That's his house over there on the left. You follow this road up near the top, there's a tiny house, that was Joshua Gearin. Off this way, there was a man named Peter Kimball, who was a wealthy man, but he was a loyalist. And down the road that way, off the map, there was Dr. Liddell. He was married to one of Mr. Wick's daughters. The average farm around here at the time was about 70 acres. Mr. Wick was the biggest landowner in the township. He owned 1,400 acres. We don't know how much he had cleared off, but probably 100, maybe 200 acres. The rest of it was woods. And that's why the army comes, because they want all those trees. So that's going to be a big impact on Mr. Wick's land. He's going to lose a lot of wood. And he and his neighbors are going to get impacted in other ways, and we'll talk about that as we head outside. So
Okay.
Cool.
right this way.
All right.
Probably crops.
Okay.
Mr. Wick and any farmer around here, they don't have like a cash crop that makes them tons of money. Basically, you grow what you need to feed your family. And if you have a surplus of any of that stuff, that's what you take into town to trade for stuff that you can't make, like coffee or sugar or tea. So Wick grew wheat, corn, oats, rye, buckwheat.
So was he a farmer by trade, or like
Everybody's
what was
a
his
farmer.
Yeah, everyone's a farmer, right?
Even
You
if
have
you're
to cultivate your own stuff.
a minister, a doctor, a lawyer, you still got to
You
eat.
see it, you're a farmer.
There's no supermarkets, everybody farms.
But what was his primary responsibility? I mean, how did he?
Farming.
That was it. Yeah.
I mean, that's what people do, unless you have some other trade.
Yeah.
So the grains go to feed a family, goes to feed his livestock. He had horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens, and dunghill fowl.
Wow.
He would have had an orchard for growing fruit, a kitchen garden for growing vegetables, and of course some of that land is going to be fenced in. And the fences aren't to keep animals in, it's really to keep animals out. Except for your sheep, you let all your animals graze wherever they want to from April to November. That way you don't have to feed them. They can feed themselves.
Yeah.
Then in the winter, you've got to bring them in and feed them on stuff that you grew on your property. You'd have pastures in the summer, for example, where they graze. But when the army comes, one of the things the army loves to steal are fences, because it's dry wood. It's portable. So fences would disappear. In 1782, New Jersey passed a law said that if you'd suffered damages during the war and hadn't gotten paid, you could apply and file a claim. And one of the big things you read about is them filing claims for fences, also stealing stuff. you had to have a little statement. It's really neat. So they'll write these things like, I went out to my pigsty and noticed one of my pigs was gone. I followed the tracks in the snow into the woods to the offal. The offal's the leftovers, because you're not going to bring a live pig into camp. It's a little obvious. So
Right.
slaughter it in the woods, take out what you want, leave the rest. So he finds the offal. Then he says, I followed the tracks from the offal into the camp and lost them in the tracks of all the other soldiers. So I'm sure the soldiers stole my pig. So they're stealing tools, they're stealing fences, they're stealing animals, they're stealing clothes, they're stealing
Whatever they could
anything.
use. Yep.
And if they can't use it, they're going to steal it, and they're going to trade it for something they can use.
Very true.
Unfortunately, even though New Jersey passed the law, you could file a claim. They never pay anybody. But for historians like me, it's good because we know some of the impact of it.
Yeah.
So this would have been a kitchen garden here. Normally would have had a big board fence. This is where you'd grow vegetables to feed the family. A lot of it would be root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, onions, things that grew underground that you could store in a root cellar and use year round. But you grow fresh vegetables too, so you could use them seasonally. Then this is Henry Wick's house.
Oh.
It was built about 1750. It's a Cape Cod style house because Mr. Wick originally came from the eastern end of Long Island, from what we call the Hamptons. And that area had been settled by New England people who brought New England architecture to Long Island, and then Wick brought it here to New Jersey. So it's the original house, but it has been restored.
Okay.
So basically it's the beams and the framework and a little bit of the paneling that's original. You're standing in the kitchen, of course. This is where you spend most of your time cooking and even probably eating. And for a lot of people, this was your entire house, just one room this size. Mr. Wick, though, in terms of 18th century perspective, is wealthy. He's the biggest landowner in the township. Most people have 70 acres. He's got 1,400 acres. He probably comes here and buys that much land because when he came, he was the first person to live on the land. The land was relatively cheap. And by buying this much, eventually when he dies, it could be divided up amongst his children. We think he's sort of fiscally conservative because when he dies, they inventory all his holdings. And he actually has more money out on loan to people than he has in the value of all his possessions.
Wow.
In those days, there's no banks, so if you got spare cash, you loan it out to people, you collect interest.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like having a savings account. So he's doing pretty well. He had a wife. He had 3 daughters and 2 sons. But then things changed from the Army and the war comes. Earlier in the war, in 1777, he took in an officer who was sick. Officers at that time don't go to military hospitals. They find quarters in someone's house and doctors come and make house calls to them. So in 1779, when the 10,000 guys show up, generals start looking for quarters in the area. By law, they don't have to take people, but some people do. Wick had had an officer in his house before. He didn't seem to care, so he takes in a general. I mean, one way, it's good. You've got a general in your house who's got guards around your house.
Right.
True.
Right.
So like when people file all those claims for damages, Wick doesn't file one, probably because there were guards here all the time. So over here is where General Sinclair stayed. So we have a small bedroom over there. And you can tell it's a bedroom because it's small
Oh,
and
yeah, wow.
has no fireplace. Because you didn't burn fire at night when you're asleep. It's not safe. You just have, if you're lucky, have curtains around your beds and you just have lots of blankets. And somebody's playing.
Yeah.
Then this for the family would have been what they would have called a sitting room, so like a family room. But during this winter, General Sinclair from Pennsylvania takes over the small bedroom and he has 2 secretaries who would have slept in here. They also use this as office space and dining space. Sinclair was in charge of 2,000 soldiers from Pennsylvania, about a mile north of here. The Wicks lucked out though. The Army's here for 6 months, but Sinclair's only physically in the house for about 7 days. He's off on furlough and off on other duties. But while he occupies this side of the house, the Wicks are on the other side. So over here we have another unheated bedroom, and then this would have been the family's parlor, the best room in the house. But the family moves into this side. At this point, the family's just Mr. Wick, who's in his early 70s, his wife, who's in her early 60s, And just their youngest daughter is still here. She's about 20. So they get by, but the Army never really leaves. The Army does leave in bulk in June because there's battles to the east of us, but the Pennsylvania line huts a mile away are made into a military hospital, and it's in operation for over a year. So there's always 6 soldiers up there, and the doctors and officers who care for them. Then the next fall, in November, the Pennsylvania troops come back again. They can't go to their old huts because they've been made into a hospital, so they move into the huts of Hand's Brigade and Connecticut line just down the road, so there's soldiers nice and close again. Mr. Wick's son-in-law, Dr. Liddell, apparently talked to an officer who mentioned the meeting in a letter, and he said that Dr. Liddell was rather shocked, or Dr. Liddell and his father-in-law were rather shocked to see the Army coming back again. And they complained that they had lost 600 acres of trees the previous winter, and with the Army coming back, they expected they would lose everything else.
And they were here, you said, for 4
4 different winters.
consecutive, or like?
Well, the Army's here in 77, but they're just staying in people's homes. That's when the sick officers here.
Right.
79, 80 is the big encampment,
Right.
and then the next 2 winters they're coming back again.
Wow.
So when Liddell's complaining to that officer, that's the second winter where they're camping on the land.
Right.
And Mr. Wick, though, he dies the next month. He dies in December.
Oh.
And an officer mentions that in a letter. He said, I have to paraphrase because I can't remember, but he basically says, "Old Mr. Wick is true to his word and has died. It is said he fretted himself to death." He actually dies of pleurisy, but basically from that quote, you kind of get the impression he's sitting there going, "Hey, they're messing up my land, I'm losing my trees, I'm going to die soon." So he passes away. The Army comes back again another winter, and Mrs. Wick actually sells wood to the officers there that winter. But we'll finish up back here.
Okay.
So when Mr. Wick dies, in his will he gives everything to his wife Mary. She lives for another couple of years, then she passes away. Then the property gets divided up amongst 3 daughters and 1 granddaughter. One son had already died, the other son just disappears, so we don't know what his story is. The granddaughter is the child of one of those sons. Apparently there were other children in that family too, but Mrs. Wick in her will says that her son became a lunatic and exceedingly troublesome and expensive in his lifetime, and his wife gave up his bed, so the other children she did not think were hers.
Oh, interesting.
It's like a really nasty will.
Yeah.
And it ends up the daughters contest the will because Temperance, the youngest daughter, one who'd been caring for the parents when they were older, she gets the house, she gets the furnishing, she gets the livestock, she gets 500 acres of land. She's still single, but within a year, she finds a husband.
Interesting, right?
A former soldier from New Jersey who'd been here probably for at least 3 of the encampments. And they end up having to pay the other sisters a little bit of money to settle the accounts. Temperance now becomes Tempe Tuttle. She lives here with her husband for a few years, then they move into Morristown, they rent the property out. Mid-19th century, descendants sell it, and it goes through lots of hands. In the late 19th century, millionaires from New York start coming out to Morris County and other counties nearby because it's got clean air, clean water, and a train line. So you can go in and out of the city for the men who have to take care of the business. And what those people, when they come out here to vacation, decide they really, really like it. So then they start buying up lots of little farms and make huge estates. So this became part of a huge estate of over 2,000 acres belonged to a man named Luther Kuntz, who was a banker. If you're from the area, there's this private Catholic boys' school right next door. It's called Del Barton.
Yes.
They were the big sports teams.
Yes.
That was Kuntz's house.
Oh,
And
the main building. Okay.
And Del Barton comes, the old main.
Yes.
And Del Barton comes from the name of his sons.
Oh, okay.
I see.
Delancey, and there was a Barton, or something, a Bartholomew, and then there's one that has a ton in it. They put
Right.
Yeah.
We stuck them together.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So this is Kuntz's land.
So his land stretches from here all the way to where Del Barton is currently.
And
Yeah. Wow.
Probably Lewis Morris, too.
Yeah. Wow.
So there's people living in the house, but they're tenant farmers. They basically pay the rent by probably providing crops to the big house.
Right.
When Mr. Kuntz dies, his sons actually start selling off property. They actually offered this house to the Daughters of the American Revolution in Morristown, but they had the Schuyler Hamilton house and they didn't have any way to keep it up. They offered it to the Washington Association at the Ford Mansion, but they got the Ford Mansion. So it just stays with the property. But in the real late 20s, they start having this idea of creating a national park. And Congress passes a bill, 1933, to create the park. And the proviso is everything has to be donated. Government's not going to spend any money. So a man named Lloyd Smith wanted to preserve the land, so he bought up this portion of the land from a development company that had bought it. A man named McAlpin donates some land. The town donates land in Jockeyhollow. They donate Fort Nonsense. The Washington Association donates the Ford Mansion. And you get Morristown National Historical Park. And that was done when Hoover was president. His last day in office, he signs the bill. And then FDR becomes president. And he creates all sorts of projects that help develop the park. We had a CCC camp. We had Public Works Administration build our museum in Morristown. And they hired all sorts of people to do work. Now, the park wouldn't be where it is now if it wasn't for the Depression.
For that work.
It's funny, there was a newspaper article the first year the park was in operation. And the newspaper article said that there were packs of wild dogs roaming through Jockeyhollow and they were killing all the bunnies and squirrels and small animals. And the superintendent went to Congress and he was asking for more money so they could hire a park ranger who would live and work just in Jockeyhollow, who could go around and just shoot all the dogs. And Congress said, well, you got your money for the year, and a park ranger would cost $1,200 a year, and we don't want to give you that money. So the dogs continued to roam through the park.
Interesting. Huh.
Wow.
And, as one of the projects was they restored the house.
Yeah, that's really
Amazing.
Cool. Yeah.
Oh, and then in terms of the Wicks, they were supposed to be paid rent for the use of the house. They were supposed to be paid for the trees they lost. They were supposed to get all sorts of payments, just like everybody else in the area.
Right.
But Congress is just printing up paper money or handing out IOUs. At this point, they're just handing out what they call certificates, which are IOUs. The war ends, Congress has no money. They have no power to tax. Eventually, we get a new government under the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton's Secretary of the Treasury, and he gets a bill passed where they're going to absorb all the war debts. So the federal government's going to pay everything. But the federal government still has no power to tax. And what they end up doing is, instead of paying you for your paper, if you turn it into them, they'll give you a government bond. If you're old enough, you remember like savings bonds?
Yeah, exactly.
Which you can't cash in right away.
No.
You gotta wait, I think it was 10 years, and it gets 6% interest.
Yeah.
But it turns out 92% of the population hadn't waited that long. They wanted cash. So they sold everything off to speculators. It's just like the commercials you see on TV now. I've got a structured sale.
Yeah, right.
Cash now.
Right.
There were people who just go around and go, I'll give you 10 cents on the dollar. So people do it. So they sell it
because
off
they want
cheap,
the money.
and eventually the speculators make a killing.
Interesting.
In fact, the day the bill was passed in Philadelphia about this, people started running out of town and just knocking on doors. Got any of those little certificates?
Yeah.
I'll pay you 10 cents on the dollar. And they're like, geez, I've had this forever. Sure.
Right.
And then like a week later they found out, oh, if I'd only waited.
Yeah.
So
that's crazy.
Wick didn't even know, of course, because he was dead.
Right.
It would be Tempe and the others who sort of just fuddled along.
Amazing.
Interesting. Wow.
It's such an interesting story. I never even.
Wow.
Did you know this much?
Well, I knew about.
Wick family?
I've been here for not that much. No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's the fun part about doing tours. You tell people more stuff.
Yeah. More.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
more.
so
we
much
used to just sit
information.
here and let people wander through, and
Right.
they just wander through.
Right.
You know,
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Yeah. So did they use the? I had read somewhere or knew somehow that some of the medicinal stuff that came out of the gardens were used for the troops that were here. Is that no?
No.
Okay.
I mean, the army's basically a city.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's huge. Yeah.
And they have all these different departments.
Okay.
In essence, they have a health department.
Yes,
They've got all
I
these
saw
doctors
that.
And they're getting
Yeah.
medicines from all over the place.
Okay.
What they grew in this garden wouldn't support.
Wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was small.
I mean,
Okay.
that's the thing. It's like, even in terms of food, a soldier, has this big ration they're supposed to get, but if you boil it down to the simplest thing, they're supposed to get a pound of beef and a pound of bread every day.
Yeah, and that didn't
So
happen.
every day they need 10,000 pounds of beef and 10,000 pounds of bread at this camp.
And
Yeah,
that's
it's
impossible.
impossible.
And the area can't supply that.
No.
When the army was here during that particular winter was the worst winter in U.S. history.
Correct.
Lots of snow, lots of wind. So after a 4-day blizzard, nothing moved, so they couldn't bring any food. And guys were
That's
eating
true.
dogs and shoes and sticks.
Correct. Right.
And they're desperate to get food, but the area couldn't supply it. What Washington did right after that was he put a quota on every county in New Jersey and said, you'll give us this many bushels of wheat, this many head of cattle, and we'll pay you.
Right.
And if you don't give it to us, we'll come take it. But by letting the counties decide, they could go, well, we'll take it from the Tory over there. Or we'll take
Right.
it from the rich guy over here. We won't take it from the widow over here.
Right,
Yeah,
right, right,
yeah.
But
right.
if they come in, they're just going to take it.
Yeah.
Right.
So New Jersey gives them enough food for about a month and a half. They're doing fine.
Okay.
They talk about they've got plenty of food. That runs out. New Jersey doesn't have any more surpluses because remember, what you grow here is going to have last you for a year till your next crops come in. So food has to come from greater distances. Like a lot of the beef came from New England. I'm just going to tell these people they can walk through if they can figure out how to open the door.
No,
No.
they
But
didn't.
they can't. So you've got two ways of getting the meat here from Connecticut.
Yeah.
You slaughter the beef, you salt it, you put it in barrels, you hire a wagon, put them on, have the wagon
And hope
come,
it
you
gets
gotta
here
feed it.
during that winter, right?
That's true.
So that's an
Yeah.
expensive proposition.
Yeah.
So usually what they do is they take the cattle and make them walk. So you start out with a 500-pound steer in Hartford. Usually they're going like droves of 50 or 100. And you make them walk here to Morristown. But the birds control New York City, so you can't cut through the city. So from Hartford, they go directly west. They cross the Hudson like in Newburgh, New
gosh.
York. They
Come
come
down.
south. Of course, they pass right by West Point, which is a military base. So then they tend to poach stuff at West Point.
Yeah.
And then eventually what had been 100 cattle are now
Yeah.
maybe about 50. And when they get here, that 500-pound steer is no longer 500 pounds.
Exactly.
And they complain that they're eating very lean beef.
Right.
And ideally you would just have them go graze in the fields.
But they
Yeah.
needed
But
them
it's
so-
winter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they need it right away.
Yeah.
So that's what they
Interesting.
get.
That's pretty cool. Wow.
Yeah, that's quite a trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, you always think
I don't
about
even like to
cattle
drive
drives.
that, let alone.
Yeah, I know.
You always think about cattle drives as, a cowboy thing.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
It was interesting. I had people from Texas the other day. And there's nothing to do with the revolution in Texas, but the American Revolution is a world war. Eventually, Spain and France are in the war.
Correct. Right.
And everything west of the Mississippi during the Revolution belonged to Spain. Everything east was English. So
Correct.
the English and Spanish are fighting over
Fighting over
Mississippi. The governor of New Orleans, a man named Galvez, he attacks the British along the Mississippi. He captures Mobile. He eventually captures Pensacola. When he first starts out, he's got this army, but he's got to get food for them, and there's not enough food. So he contacts the Spanish missions in Texas, which raise cattle, but they just raise them for themselves. There's no other place to ship them. But now they actually have a cattle drive from the missions in Texas all
Wow.
the way to New Orleans to feed the Spanish army. So that's the first Texas cattle drive.
Oh my gosh.
That's crazy. Huh.
Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
it's
I mean,
very
I
interesting,
appreciate
very
it
much.
so much. The information.
Justified my life for the
There
day.
you go.
100%.
I've been
Yeah.
doing research in the back room, but it's
Yeah, it's fun. It's always
Yeah,
fun
it's so nice to hear.
share.
shivered in our bare feet, some of us, and without coats, while an officer reads us the general orders and assigns us a guard duties. There's a powerful amount of guarding we do around here, on account of lately the British been coming out